co-founder and president of the PACT Urban Peace Program. And David has been a Rotarian since 1987. I don't know, Brian, have you been a Rotarian longer? Or I think you're the only one that would come close to David.
2 years less, 89 I joined, or 88 or 89, somewhere like that.
Okay, well, you two are both in the running up there. David, I believe, was a charter member of the Rotary Club of
York.
High Park.
Yeah. Oh, David. Yeah, David. Okay.
And he's a businessman, has a successful trucking business. But we're going to hear about what I think is really his life's passion, and that's social change, and how he's been able to do that through the PACT Urban Peace Program. So with that introduction, David, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Howard. Can everybody hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Right, okay. Well, I'm looking at my charter picture in 1987. It's on my wall in my office here, and it's been a long time, but it's the first time I've done a speech like this, so I'm really excited about it. And I don't want to date myself, but we're just getting into the era of personal computers when I joined that Rotary Club. So it's really great to be able to communicate in such a more effective and wonderful way. So thank you. Thanks for having me on, and I'm delighted to talk about my path, my story, the impact Rotary's had on me, and how an international Rotary president really helped me shape my vision for what I felt was the path for both myself and the guy that co-founded PACT, a guy named Dan Koronacchia. It was a guy named Louis G.I. who I was really blown away when we spoke yesterday, Howard. Gordon, about the fact that you're on a committee with Louis G.I. And he was the guy that really started it all for me. And, we've put 22 years of hard work and passion into developing this model. And a lot of it was incumbent on just a simple idea he had that Rotary could play a critical role and become a catalyst for creating solutions to build peace in urban communities. And I've never met him, so hopefully, I can do that, considering he has such a great impact on my life. And so is Rotary. My story starts out with domestic violence. The actual name of PACT, the registered charity, is called the Canadian Foundation for the Prevention of Family Violence. And I grew up in a really lovely, peaceful home, and so did the fellow that started PACT with me. At the same time, he lived in a really difficult area of Toronto called Parkdale, and I worked there. My dad had a trucking company, and we had lots of employees, and there was a huge amount of domestic violence within the employee base. And Dan lived in Parkdale, and he was very connected to the community, experienced those same types of impacts on the families. And the fellow that originally chartered my club, the Rotary Club of Toronto Parkdale, was a guy named Neil Webster. He was he ran Ross Craig Funeral Home on Church Street, or on Queen Street, and in his practice, he was tremendously impacted by how domestic violence even affected his interactions with his clients. And so it really was his idea to charter the club with the vision of building a much needed shelter for women and children in domestic violence in the Parkdale area. So Dan and I joined the club based on that, and that would have been in 1986, and a lot of these clubs take a year to get going. And it was chartered in April in 1987, and I guess about a year and a half into it, it became apparent that we didn't have the resources to actually build a shelter. So Dan and I decided to take the bull by the horns, and we started a charity called the Redwood Shelter. And I was the president, he was the founder. And it became a really, really incredible endeavor that taught me about the power of community. We basically pulled off a miracle. In a long run, it took 6.5, 7 years, but ironically, we were able to convert a 15,000 square foot liquor store into a shelter for domestic violence, and Rotary played a critical role. And many Rotary clubs got involved. The community actually built the bloody thing when we didn't have the money to do it. And on December 13th, 1993, it opened and has 33 beds, and every bed's been filled since then. And I guess about a year down the road, we decided we kind of achieved what we wanted to, and they got some government funding, which gave it the financial stability it needed. And we decided it was time to move on. But we did look back, and we were incredibly touched by, the whole idea of Rotary, the vision of making a difference in the community, feeling the power of unconditional kindness, and creating a space and environment for the community to, bring the gift of contribution towards a project. And it really, gave us great insight into really a powerful concept, both the fact of what, Rotary can do at a micro community-based level, and what the community can do when you create a space for them to actually go and help and create change. So I guess it was around at the end of 1992, 1993, we began to look at what would be next. And one of the things we recognized that many of the children that were involved with the Redwood Shelter had developed a learned behavior pattern based upon growing up in a home that they were continuously exposed to domestic violence. And ultimately, many of them would adopt an intergenerational pattern that would self-perpetuate, and they would, in fact, go out and at some level, live those subconsciously learned behaviors, and the cycle of violence would self-perpetuate. And I'm not in any way implying that any kid or child that's exposed to domestic violence will, go up and live those behaviors. But I think it affects everybody. It can, if you can be, a low self-esteem for life, not living up to your capabilities, self-perpetuating behaviors, but it cuts across all cultural and economic lines and has a devastating impact on the community. So we felt that we wanted to, rather than build another shelter, we wanted to build an organization that we felt could deal with the underlying behavior that drove domestic violence, violence in the community, criminal behavior, showing the impact of, a breakdown of the family unit and those characteristics that evolved out of that. So we wanted to deal with the underlying cause rather than building a new shelter that dealt with the symptom. Obviously, we recognize we need to build more shelters, and we've always supported that. But so with that in mind, we began to do a lot of research. And one day I sat with Dan, and we were in a restaurant, and looking at the intergenerational patterns. I had a napkin, and I drew a circle on the napkin, and I attached 3 sticks to the circle and put 3 more circles attached to the circle. And I said, well, if that's a child exposed to domestic violence and they self-perpetuate that pattern one way or the other as they grow up, what would that look like over 3 generations if I could break the pattern in that one individual? And the answer was 243. And so I went to our printer at the time, and he was a really good guy, and he drew a chart of what it would look like. And in the end, he drew me this giant triangle of circles, and 243 people over 5 generations could be impacted directly or directly by that one pattern. So the idea of our foundation was to build an incredible program that would break the underlying patterns that are related to it, so that we would stop that cycle, and that in our lifetime, through the power of Rotary, if we could build a program that had the potential to impact 1 million children in Rotary cities all over the world, ultimately over 5 generations, our original actions of kindness could affect 250 million people. And that was really our visual mission statement. The other thing that we realized was the power of the community, which was the operational component. You know, we saw things almost like a geodesic dome, which is a really obscure thing, but they are the strongest architectural form in the world. And it's like those, like a pod, and it's made up of triangles, and the triangles have little strong connection points, and those connection points give it its strength. And we felt that if we could build an organization that embraced the power of the community at all levels, the more connections we made, the stronger that our model would be. So that was the evolution of PACT. And you know, one of the areas that we wanted to start with was we wanted to understand what the problem is. And I'm going to talk a little bit about proportionality within our social infrastructures, because I think it's an extremely critical thing. Matter of fact, I went out last night with a guy named Rick Bloom. It was his birthday. We have our birthdays pretty much in the same week, and we're the same age. And I met him 15 years ago, and he was a really special guy. He was the first Crown attorney hired in Ontario to run a youth court. And he was a really compassionate guy. He was a defense lawyer, and he really cared about kids. And typically the youth court is really the bottom of the bottom place that you want to start in the court to progress your career. But he really loved it, and he was the first one in our province. And I was lucky enough to meet him when we began PACT, and he was kind enough to take me out for lunch, and he explained to me what the problem was and what the issues were. And by the way, if you hear a dog barking, it's my dog wanting a bone at the door. So I may have to stop and give him a biscuit. Excuse me. Then she'll start barking. But at any rate, so I sat down with Rick over lunch, and he said, look, what I'm going to tell you is going to blow you away, because it's not what you think. I want to tell you what the system looks like from the inside out. He said, okay, the Scarborough Youth Court is one of the busiest courts in Canada. And I process every charge against young offenders. Last year, we processed 1,700 charges. And so I go through every one of those charges because I care so much, and I divert all the ones that aren't serious. And at the end of the day, I've got about 800 to 900 charges, and I have 60 kids, and I call them revolving door criminals. And these kids have exhibited habitual patterns at as early as 13 or 14. They're actually, many of them are habitual criminals at that point. And he said that those kids are responsible, those 60 kids are responsible for 1,000 of the charges, and they're pretty much all serious. So he said, if you really want to make a difference, I'm desperate for programming. I have no resources. If you could build me a program that would deal with these youth and help transform their lives and turn their lives around before they become adults and get a criminal record that's attached them to the life, it would be an incredible thing. So you need to build a reintegration program. So he said, I take these kids, I put them into custody, they get to the point where they've made some progress, we let them back out, they go back into the environment that caused the problem, and they repeat, and it's a revolving door. That's why I call them revolving door criminals. And if you don't do anything, next thing you know, they become society's problems. They'll be responsible for the vast majority of crime and untold millions of dollars. So build the program to fix it. So I tried a number of things, but one of the most effective things that came up was an idea of life coaching. At the time I built the Redwood Shelter, I was running a couple of businesses, building a brand new home myself, and building the Redwood Shelter and running 2 businesses. I was completely overwhelmed. So I picked up a book one night by a guy named Tony Robbins, and I hired one of his life coaches in California, and it cost me a ton of money, but he coached me for over a year every week, and it made a huge difference. And it gave me the capacity that I didn't have to get through the process and become a more effective and to achieve what I wanted to do. So when it came to the coaching and the reintegration program, we came up with the idea of life coaching, and it's turned out to be an incredible success. And the reason it is so successful is because it's a tool that is capacity building and is completely outside of the justice system. And what do I mean by that? Well, you know, you've got all kinds of support mechanisms within the system, different agencies. There's probation officers, there's different agencies that support you. There's support systems if you're in custody, there's support systems if you're out of custody. But one of the major components of a lot of these kids is the complete breakdown of the family unit and the parental income component that goes with that. And I think at some level, coaching is a combination of many things, but if somebody asked me to describe what is coaching, metaphorically, and not being a life coach, but being coached. One of the things that I can tell you about coaching, and one way I explain it metaphorically that is really resounds with people is, there was a kid named Les Magar. He was the first kid that went into the coaching program many years ago, about 12 or 13 years ago. I was intricately involved in the process for the first 3 or 4 kids once we developed the program. And he was a kid that Rick Bloom actually referred when he was appointed to the bench in a place called Newmarket, which is a bit north of Toronto. And I met Les, and Les was charged with a home invasion. He had a pretty long rap sheet, and I met him in a halfway house as he was coming out of Brookside detention, and he agreed to go into the coaching program. So I went and I met him, and I found out about his life. And what I found out was that he was abandoned by his mom and dad at 6 years old. He was separated from his siblings, and he was his dad was an alcoholic and mom was a drug dealer, and he had lived in 21 group homes by the time he got to PACT. And so I looked at this beautiful face in this kid, and I looked at what he did, and I said, you know, that could be any kid, and you know, look at where he is, and look at what we did to him as a society, and from a parental perspective. So with that in mind, we told him about the coaching program, and so I looked at Les, and you look at these kids, they're like in a 15-foot hole in the ground. And what you naturally are inclined to do as a parent is you want to reach down and grab that kid and give him a big hug and make it better. But that's not the right thing to do. What a life coach will do is they'll come to the edge of the hole, they'll look down, they'll say, don't worry, I'm going to help you. I'll be right back. And they'll go over to Home Depot, buy a couple of 2x4s and some doweling, a drill and some screws. They'll throw it down into the pit, and they'll tell the kid how to build the ladder to get out. And that's a really great way to describe capacity building and what coaching does. I can't do it any more effectively. So how this process works is, number one, from a macro perspective, and why it's so important, why it's so scalable, why it's so important to Rotary is the reality, you know, being in and outside of the social industry. I've been a business and an entrepreneur for 40 years, but I've also been a social entrepreneur, actually working within the system for as long. And what you find when you look at it is that the problems are so manageable, yet the way that they approach it, often not doing an effective job, is so massive. If I told you there's only 400 kids that fall into that category in Toronto, and that if you don't do anything, they're going to end up costing the system at least $3 to $4 million over their lifetime, and they'll get caught in the cycle and self-perpetuate it and teach a lot of it to their family, and it all can be done with a prevention tool. So if there's 400 kids in a city like Toronto, and it costs $1 billion for crime and policing in Toronto, and 33 or 34 billion in Canada, why don't we embrace the idea of early prevention? So the idea with the coaching program is we went to the justice system, we went to the judges, we market to the judges, we talk about this program, and they will make a referral of an appropriate use. Usually these kids are either coming out of custody or they're on the brink of custody, and a probation officer or a judge will make a referral. Our CADA, in this case, our program manager, will go out and go through a series of intake meetings to make sure that they actually want to make a difference and they're motivated for change. And we've gotten quite good at it over the years. And we'll take a kid in, we'll match them up with a life coach, and that life coach will work with that kid for up to 1.5 years to build that capacity to turn their lives around. And it's a pretty tight reporting process. We work with probation and we report to them on a quarterly basis. And 65% of the kids that go through the system don't reoffend and turn their lives around. And that's, you know, a pretty remarkable thing. So that is the essence of the coaching program with what we do with PACT. We're going to come back to the coaching program in a second, but I want to tell you about our skill development programs, because they become pretty critical. One of the things that we're trying to achieve with our skill development programs is we recognize that we can break the cycle of criminal behavior with a lot of youth, but ultimately, if you can't get a kid into a job path, they get caught in the cycle of poverty, and often you run into problems where they'll go backwards because they can't get a job, and they're intricately symbiotically connected. One of the things that we found when we looked at skill development was, although there is a plethora of things kids could do, not many of them were suited for the type of kids that we were dealing with because of where they were on the skill development ladder. I don't know if you can see this. Can everybody see that? That's the skill development ladder, and that's this process a kid would go through to go from, you know, ground level all the way up to integrating into a job. One of the big problems and one of the challenges that we have in our community for these types of kids is, you know, there's all kinds of good programs. You can go take a cooking program, get unemployment for 16 weeks, try to learn how to cook. But if you don't give a shit and you're not going to show up and you're mad at the world, you're not really going to get far. So what we've done at PACT is we've specialized in the gap between the floor and the first big step. And so the way that we've done that is we've put together some really effective, simple ideas that which we feel for the most part with regard. And one is when, you know, we go to a kid that wants to learn a skill. What we do is we create a very, very kind beginner 8-week environment where a kid will come in, they'll have an option of learning how to paint, or maybe learning how to play an instrument, or learning how to cook, or going through a fashion program, whatever it is. They'll make a choice and do something that they like and have the choice to make that. And once they enter it, they go into a beginner program, which is very nurturing and kind and loving with a little bit of structure in the beginning. And everybody eats a beautiful lunch, and the instructors are passionate. And so what we do is we create a sense of belonging and a primary skill development to the point where we spark a passion. We ignite excitement. At that point, our programs begin to progress and allow kids to go all the way up the chain to either entry job levels or to get them to go into higher education. And it's a magical formula. A great example is our painting program, because a lot of high-risk kids are going into that right now. Our instructor actually owns a painting contracting business, and it's an immersion 6-hour process for 8 weeks every Saturday. And they learn the fundamentals of drywalling, painting, puttying, paint brushing, cleaning the brush, etc. And then they get a competency certificate. And the ones that really like it, PACT will pay for them to go on the job site, and the coach or the teacher happens to be the contractor. So he understands those kids, and he's a little bit more tolerant, and he becomes a transition coach, which is a critical component within the infrastructure. And so what that does is it takes a kid that would get eaten alive in a normal job environment, and it puts them through a transitional process where they can adapt. And that makes all of the difference in the world. And at that point, they can begin to go on to, you know, full-time employment, or go into the trades, or get into an apprenticeship program. But they've been taught about punctuality and commitment and all those types of things that are extremely important. And there's a transition into it, rather than just walking into it cold and getting hammered, which would happen within a normal employment environment. So our skill development programs all have continuity built into them so that youth can go through a process and actually make it through, and most importantly, make it from the bottom floor level to that first step of the skill development ladder, which is where, you know, where the problem is for these types of kids. And we've specialized in that, whether it's an artistic program or cooking or whatever. That's our niche, and that's what we do. So what PACT really essentially is, if you look at our website, it's an organization that has a coaching program that deals with high-risk young offenders, and it has a skill development program that takes not only those kids, but all at-risk kids, and gives them a really lovely process to find something they like and progress at a skill development level that can translate into either a job or higher education. Getting back to the coaching program for a moment. So I tried to give you a micro perspective of how it works, why it's important, and I can't emphasize enough the proportionality within the system. it's the great secret. And what I mean by that is, if you look at our social infrastructures, whether it's our justice system, our healthcare system, there's always a disproportionate few that put tremendous stress on the system. And we really live in a society that has not embraced the model of early prevention. You know, it makes sense to, you know, invest $3,500 or $5,000 into breaking the cycle of a kid that will ultimately cost the system $4 million. It makes more sense to make the investment as a young offender. And it's pretty much that way within the social infrastructure. Now, getting back to the model for a moment and talking about scalability. In summary, I think I'd like to say with great humility that we've got the foundation of a really great process that can look at the two, you know, foundational issues about transforming the lives of at-risk youth. The question is, you know, how do you scale things, and how things work outside of our social infrastructures to be successful? And, you know, how can we as a community create models that can have global impact? And so what I've learned is, you know, one of the fundamental things organizing principles I've learned about being a Rotarian is, I think in our organization, great things are organic in nature. They don't start at the top. They're not systemic. They're organic and they evolve. You know, and in fact, the essence and the start and the genesis of Rotary is really like that. It was one club in Chicago. And that whole beautiful idea, that incredible humanitarian organization that is now all over the world, evolved out of that one simple formula. No doubt it's been, you know, revised and improved as it's gone along and adapted and adjusted, but it is ultimately the essence of those simple fundamental concepts, principles, ideas of kindness and fairness and caring of community integrity that has made Rotary what it is. With that same thought in mind, I look at PACT, and it really is an unconditional model and really an extension of Rotary values. I want to talk a little bit about the power of unconditional kindness, because I think Rotary is one of those organizations that is a true reflection of that. One of the things that I see being involved in our social infrastructure for 25 years is I see how agenda and bullshit gets in the way of doing the right thing. And it is very, very discouraging because, you know, at the end of every bureaucracy that's not effective, you know, when you go to a food bank and there's no food, or you look at a school and, you know, the schools in the priority areas who have all the problems of being choked from funding, and the reliance on funding is put on parents rather than the idea of a public education that frustrates the hell out of you. So what I'm saying is that, you know, at the end of the day, it really, for me, is about kindness in doing the right thing, you know, in the Rotary 4-way test, right? Is it the right thing to do kind of thing? And so we've tried to take a look at this concept of unconditional kindness and build a program that is constantly asking ourselves two questions. One, what is the absolute best program that we can create to support and serve the youth that we're here to help? And the second thing is, are we making unconditional actions towards that objective? And I can tell you for 25 years, that's pretty much the way we've done it. I'm in no way implying that we haven't made lots of mistakes, but I can tell you every one of those mistakes has evolved out of an unconditional choice. Sure, we've gone through learning curves, but I think what builds great organizations is that focus on unconditional kindness. And when I look at our government, our social infrastructures at all levels, there always seems to be, in many cases, an agenda that gets in the way of doing the right thing. So I look at business, which I've been part of for so long, and I look at the explosion of technology and how we've been able to tackle problems and solve them. Then I go and I look at a community housing project that is a shithole and is in better shape in 1960 when they built it than now, you know, or a high school rate that's a failure, or a food bank that doesn't have enough food. And I say, why is that? Why does that happen? And I equate a lot of it to the lack of community, the lack of organic community, and unconditional actions. So I say, well, how can we really make it different? How can we make a difference as an organization? So I feel like this urban peace model has become a critical thing for what we're doing in our community and our society, in that, you know, we need to take an introspective look on our home turf, in our own cities, and recognize that we have a really big problem, but that problem is so incredibly manageable with proper strategies and funding, that we can really take something, make it work in one place, and scale it like business. You know, what business is extremely good at is, one, building an incredible model, two, improving that model on a continuous basis, and three, scaling that model to other places. So that's how I see PACT. So, you know, getting back to that model, if you look at what I said about Toronto, about 400 high-risk young offenders, well, Toronto is like a lot of cities. It really has a lot of areas, they're underprivileged areas. In Toronto, we call them priority neighborhoods. There's 32 of them. In every one of those neighborhoods, you pretty much have a community housing project, a high school, a couple of primaries and a middle school feeding into the high school. And the environment within the community housing program is pretty awful. And many of the types of youth that we're talking about evolve out of those environments. So one of the things that we did when we looked at how do we build this model, we chose an area called Lawrence West, which is the jungle in Toronto. It's a notorious area of difficulty, pretty much with the characteristics that I just described. And so one of our skill programs that I didn't mention is a concept called urban gardening. So we started gardening programs in schools 10 years ago, and we had an idea in this area that we could use our Grow to Learn gardening program as a catalyst to really connect into the entire school curriculum, not only within the high school, but all the feeder schools, so that we were able to develop a relationship with the schools with the thought in mind that if you're going to develop early prevention models, you better create a partnership with the educational system, because they know who those kids are. So we've done that, and we have a remarkable model. It's called the John Polanyi Garden. It's an 1.5 acre garden. It was designed from a blueprint. I think it's in its 7th or 8th year now, and it's a literal oasis. And it has 30 curriculum lessons that are tied from primary all the way to high school, tied into the educational curriculum. And you know, this year over 3,000 student visits will occur. Teachers will book lessons. They'll come into the school from the feeder schools in the area, and they'll bring their entire class. They'll come in for 2-hour lessons. We'll teach them any subject you can pick. We'll teach you and relate it to the garden. And we provide high quality experiential learning, giving kids in the priority neighborhoods a world-class education in those areas through immersion and high quality programming. And so as a result of that, we've really got to know the teachers in all these schools and the principals and the vice principals. And what they're telling us is those kids that I'm putting into my coaching program can be identified as early as grade 2. So our idea about our priority model is to go earlier into the system and create programming to break the cycle at an early level with the partnership that we have with the Toronto District School Board, and ultimately go right down into primary school to create programming that works. With the idea is it's all about early prevention. And so we're making tremendous inroads into that, and it probably looks a little bit different from the coaching program, but it's more skill development and mentoring. But we're well along the path, and we're really excited. And we're seeing absolutely remarkable results. So that model is formulating. And so the next step is what the scalability looks like.
Okay, open it up for questions. I should explain, you only get one question, because last meeting we had people that kept on asking question after question, and we couldn't get, people were waiting a long time just to get a chance to ask a question. So anyone have a question? Okay, I'll go with Wendy and then Darren.
How do I?
We can hear you.
You put me on, Darren?
Yeah.
Am I unmuted? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so hi there. That was a really great presentation, and I'm just actually astounded with the work that you're doing. I'm wondering about the metrics and how you measure success. So you said in Toronto there are 400 kids that are at risk, that are going to, you know, commit crimes and go through that revolving door. And you, if I understand what you're saying, so you, with early intervention, starting in grade 2 with gardening, painting, life coaching, you stop them. So are these 400 kids identified? Like, are they real people, or are they statistical? And how do you know? Like, how do you follow them through their lifetime? Like, how do you know you've stopped it?
Okay, that's a really good question. So I want to go right up to the coaching program, right, which is the last threshold before becoming an adult criminal caught in the justice system for life. So we deal with kids primarily with the coaching program that now are 16 to 17 years old. Some of them are 15. And they're in pretty serious problems with the law, and they're referred by the justice system, and most of them are deemed as high-risk young offenders. So we don't determine that. The system determines that. And so they are benchmarked as high risk, and the probability is many of them will get caught in the system without effective intervention. And the coaching program, as described, is a really remarkable intervention program that has turned around the lives of many of these kids. And, you know, I want to address the issue of validating results. A couple things. I want to talk about, you know, where did I come up with the 400 and where did I come up with the 65%? I want to talk about the 400 because that was a real challenge. One of the things that you find out when you look at the systems, and when I go to the police and look at their TAVIS reports, right, they can tell you how many charges there were against young offenders, but they don't want to tell you how many young offenders that it involved, right? So, but we knew from the justice system and our conversations with the courts and the judges that it was a really small group of kids, like what Rick said, 60 kids caused most of the problems. So I was racking my head, banging my head against the wall for years until I found the Alberta Law Society study, which validated our numbers. So it was done by the Alberta Law Society, and I think it was done about 5 or 6 years ago. And it wasn't specifically about benchmarking high-risk young offenders. It was more of a macro look at the life of young offenders over a 2-3 year period. But part of that process of looking at all aspects of their life, what they did is I think they took, it was 150 or 160 kids, and they had their records when they put them into the program. And they had the records when they exited the program 2 years later. So what the hypothesis that we were trying to validate based upon our, you know, our proportion or our concentration concept of it's just a small few was validated by that. So what they did was they took all of the kids and they created buckets of where they were in terms of the amount of charges they've had going into the system. You know, they had gateway 1 to 2, 3 to 5, 5 to 8, over 12, that kind of charges against them. And so what they did is they followed them for 2 years, right? Then they took all the charges that were rendered against them and they put them back into the buckets. And what we found was that the top 3 or 4 kids that were the most high risk, 15 or 20% of them were responsible for 75% of the charges. And so it was the first time that we had a little anecdotal, but it was certainly a huge validation of everything the justice system has been talking about. And so that was a critical thing. In terms of the 66%, we do our own internal tracking. We know if the kid's reoffended because we're working with the justice system up to 1.5 years. So, but you know, that doesn't, it's easy to justify your own stats. But we recently expanded the life program last spring. It's the first time we've gone kind of out of the city on our own to Belleville, which is a really high risk area, Belleville, Ontario. But we were invited down there about 5-6 years ago by the John Howard Society. They got this great big fat federal government grant, and they saw how effective our coaching program was. So they invited us actually to come down there and deliver the thing. And so we pretty much did everything. They played a little bit of a role in picking the kids, which were all deemed high risk because of the study. We ran 33 of them through over a 3-year period. And then their head office went and validated the numbers. And they were the ones that came up with the 66% of kids that went through a year, didn't reoffend, showed up to the meetings, and made progress in their lives with their goals. So that was a really important thing. And that was a third-party validation that, you know, we already knew, but it was somebody else saying it. And, you know, we're to the point where our skill programs, everything that we're doing, we've got some great new statistical people that have got involved with PACT that are going to benchmark the hell out of everything so we can show all of the impacts of these type of things. So I don't know if that answers your question.
That's good. Thank you.
Darren?
Yep. Thank you, David, again for the great presentation. It was very eye-opening to see the depth that you guys go into with the program. So like I said at the beginning, I've been involved with the youth programs in our district for just the past 10 years. And, you know, there's been a lot of students that have passed through that I've met, and we get them to identify the #1 challenge in their age group. So 15 to 18 and then 19 to 27. And surprisingly, it's the same thing. And I wanted to ask you, you might have touched base on this a little bit earlier, but what is the #1 challenge for these youth? Now, to keep in mind that the students that pass through these Rotary programs, they are, I guess, considered the cream of the crop. You know, they are chosen to go to this program.
So what is your question specifically?
Sorry?
What is your question specifically?
The question is, what is the main challenge for the students or the youth that pass through your program?
I think it varies on each kid. It's totally individual. You know, some kids have got some drug dependencies, some have learning disabilities, some have different home environments. I think the thing that is so great about coaching and the coaching model and the capacity building model is it's like the coaching process becomes the foundation for moving forward. And then the idea of leveraging the resources based upon individual needs from the community becomes a natural symbiotic part of that timeline forward and progression. An example is, you know, we've had kids that we don't typically get too extensively involved with their serious drug dependency issues. It's not really our niche, but we're having kids that, you know, we've got into rehab. There's been kids that have had learning disabilities, and we've got them involved with Frontier College. There's been kids that we've had some trauma therapy. Really, whatever the need is, we will do everything that we can to address it, to make it work. And again, it's the type of thing where, you know, we've seen the tremendous results with the resources that we have. And I think we've done an incredible job with the resources we have. But, you know, if this model is funded properly, there's no limitations to the social good that you can do. It's just improving the model with the resources that works.
Great, thank you.
Other questions?
I have one. It's Mandy.
Yeah?
Hey, Mandy.
Yeah. David, am I talking to David?
You are.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm arrived a little bit late. It sounds like this is a very serious program that we are dealing with serious offenders and stuff. How does the Rotarians play a role in participating in the PACT program? Are you looking for physical volunteers, or are you looking for financial support? Are you looking for connections with parents and etc.? How do we play the role?
Okay, so I mean, let's talk about the financial component about the power of Rotary, right? PACT now has, we're at 25, we're moving towards 30 Rotary clubs that support our coaching program. We believe that our life coaching program tied into the Urban Peace Initiative can be a critical thing for Rotary and in every city that we're in, because it plays such a critical role building urban peace. It needs to be funded. And right now, Rotary represents probably 20% of our overall funding for PACT. But it's an area that if it catches on, which it is, it can play a tremendous role at providing the leadership and the resources to deliver this vitally important program to the most at-risk youth in our community, which is a totally manageable process, and save billions of dollars and create urban peace and transform families and communities. That's the most important thing. The second thing is, I think there is a broader role from a physical perspective for Rotarians to get involved at PACT. We have 7 or 8 skill development programs that we're involved with, and mentorship within those programs is a role that Rotary is playing. Coming into our cooking programs and working along with the kids and getting to know them. Helping, being a part of PACT and taking a look at our programs and helping us to improve them in a space and an environment that encourages that. Bringing the skills of business into creating more effective and better strategy-based social delivery programs is critical. We have an urban gardening program that encompasses 3.5 acres in school gardens, volunteering within the gardens. We have a vegetable donation program at our John Polanyi site that gives away 1,000 pounds of vegetables every week to hungry people in Lawrence West. And it's a very innovative program and a great place for people to get involved. So there's many ways to do it. And, I think if you think about our coaching program for a second, there is the potential there for mentorship relationships once the kids go down the road a little bit and they need some support. It's all about identifying specific needs and matching people within the network to help a kid. In particular, maybe a kid wants to, get involved in a trade, and there's somebody within the system that can support them, or anything along that line where there's a need and a resource that can be matched with it is critical. The most important thing is the idea of taking our most at-risk youth and building a model to prevent this long-term massive problem at a fraction of the cost at an early intervention point. And I think Rotary and Rotaries, PACT really started from the Rotary Urban Peace Initiative, which came out of the vision of a guy named Louis D.I. This is a Rotary vision I'm living, which I'm in year 21, right? I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope it did.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, David.
Catalin?
Yeah, I just want to add something that is also connected maybe with Darren's previous question. And also sometimes we are looking for job opportunities for the kids, that is one of the biggest challenges that they have, because just because the problems that they have with the justice, not necessarily they are accepted in jobs easy. And that is one of the biggest barriers that we see in the society and specifically in our community of youth.
I agree.
Thank you.
Okay, I know, David, you mentioned yesterday when we were talking that this proposed global grant that the E-Club of SOWNY and the Rotary Club of York are thinking about developing over the next year and a half. First, it's coming at an opportune time for PACT because you are just at the point where you're going to try to replicate PACT outside of the GTA into other communities. You're starting with Belleville, but if Rotary is going to help you do that, then global grants would be an excellent way of getting the funds, helping get the funds that you need, because we then leverage it with the Rotary Foundation grants. And I know the U.S. is something that you have on your mind. Just wondering, Judy is in Lockport, New York, in suburban Buffalo, and I know she has one of her former students and employees in New Jersey, across from New York City there. And I know you were talking about Newark, and I was suggesting maybe Buffalo might be a good place. And I'd like to get a sense from Judy whether she thinks this kind of program might be something that Buffalo would be interested in.
I think so. I think there's a need for it. Yeah, I think this sounds great. And I don't know that it's been done at all here, so I think it's really cool.
Yeah, I think in Canada we're pretty restorative and very proactive, and I know that it depends on the jurisdiction, but some of the American jurisdictions are pretty tough. But I think one of the things that I think is important to stress is irrelevant of your perspective on crime, if you're soft or hard, irrelevant of that, the one corner of the argument that everybody can agree with is the power of early prevention. Nobody will argue that, right? Nobody's going to argue that it doesn't make sense to help a kid before he becomes a lifelong criminal, right? Nobody's going to do that. Nobody's going to disagree with the idea of, if we know who these kids are in grade 3, why wouldn't we try to do something about it then? I mean, it's absurd not to think of it that way. So, and I think that's what's so powerful about the model. And the other thing I want to say about Rotary is, on a personal level, I think things, evolve and really morph when they're supposed to morph. And sometimes it happens right away, and sometimes it takes 20 years, right? And I've had a pretty good feel on the pulse of Rotary, because I probably do 15 or 20 speeches a year. And we literally have close to 30 Rotary clubs that believe in what we're doing and pony up money every year to support the coaching program. But I feel like, lately over the last year that there's this ownership process going on with Rotary and Urban Peace and PACT and coaching program. And what they're recognizing is that, we have this tremendous opportunity as an organization to create a tremendous model for our urban areas. And I think, I said this yesterday, is almost incredible to think that, Chicago, where Rotary started in 1905, had 3,000 shootings and almost 900 murders last year. Right, you can probably look from the tower down, and it's in 3 neighborhoods. And it's the absolute reflection of the focus, the concentration, and the intergenerational aspects of everything that I've talked about. So, it makes incredible sense to develop an international model and a school of social change to support that process and that model and the teachability of that model. And, there really shouldn't be an at-risk kid in any urban jurisdiction around the world in a Rotary city that doesn't have access to a life coach. It's just insane not to, right? And the process works. It's an incredible process, and with resources, it can only get better. And if you start to go and get to them earlier, and you develop a program, you just have, what people don't, you need to do for one model, one priority neighborhood. And once you got that figured out, that's what you scale. And that's how you have 15,000 Starbucks. But it started out with one model, right? And so if we can do it in our business world, why can't we do it in our social world? And the answer to that is it can't be for profit. Because the first thing that happens when you have a private prison, right, skimping on food and not doing the best to support the people that is becomes secondary to the shareholders. And so I have this emphatic belief that the way to transform our social infrastructures everywhere is based upon not-for-profits that scale. that are guided through incredible organizations like Rotary, and that are guided by the power of unconditional kindness to build the model, constantly improve the model, scale the model, and roll the improvements out to the models that you build. And I think, you know, that's what we have in front of us. That's the incredible opportunity that, you know, we have as an organization. And I think it's taken me 21 years to get from that initial beginning to where we are now, but I feel I'm way more than halfway to the million.
Okay, thank you. Wendy?
Question.
Yeah, I have one more question.
Yeah.
And that's, how do you choose these life coaches? Because the kids that Darren was talking about, that, you know, that he's been dealing with for 10 years, are not the kids that you're dealing with. So who are these life coaches, and how do they work with kids that have challenges that maybe they have never had?
So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to frame it. I'm going to let Catalina talk, because she's our coaching manager. So first of all, they're all professionals. They've all gone through equivalent of a university course, either through the Adler Institute or the International Coaching Federation, and it's a tough slog to become a personal life coach. So that's one aspect, and everyone that works with PACT is a professional life coach. Secondly, we've spent, I guess, around 12 years developing a management adaptation model to take the coaching principles and adapt it for the needs of the court system. Maybe Catalina, you could weigh in a bit. I think she's still here.
I'm here.
Okay.
No, yeah. I mean, in addition to what David explained, PACT already evolved from the coaching perspective, and all our coaches are certified coaches, and all of them are certified by the ICF, and the ICF is one of the biggest organizations, international organizations, that is trying to just upgrade and have the coaches in a professional level. And as a matter of fact, PACT won the PRISM Award 3 years ago. That is quite important, because that was the first time that an NGO, non-profit organization, was winning the coaching award, and that is because we are really following through all the competencies of coaching. Our coaches are all professionals that came from different backgrounds, and they moved through the coaching profession. Then they have their private practice, besides having a really big heart to put in the coaching program. And as they had different kind of tools, it's really fun, because we have many coaches with many different skills that I have in consideration all those kind of skills when I'm making the pairing with the clients. Okay. And the other thing is, I don't think that you need to be an alcoholic to help an alcoholic person. Therefore, you don't need to be with the street experience just to help, because we have the wrong assumptions that all our kids are sleeping in the streets or marginalized in that way. And they have big struggles for different reasons, because they are immigrants or the parents are immigrants. They don't feel like they fit. They don't feel like they belong. They are struggling between getting their identity and the sense of belonging, all those kind of things at the same time. Mm-hmm. Then we are helping them also, because I have the theory that we as a society work very hard labeling people. And what we're trying to do is to remove those labels, because when you remove the labels, you find who you are, and you are really being able to stick with your values and move forward to reach your goals. Then what the coaching sometimes is like magic. And I ask the clients when we finish the process, how I can explain coaching better to future clients, because no one better to let me know than the youth, right? And they said, you know, it's not a way that you can explain that when we are just coming to the program, because we need to live the experience. We need to establish the rapport with the coach. And something that is really beautiful, and David referred at the beginning, that is like a year and a half. And the reason is because before we were having the year program, we call the first 3 months like a trial time. That is when they are establishing rapport and everything, because they don't have a reason to trust us, right? We give them that concession. They are forced to us. I used to joke and said, condemned to us. Then why they have to like us, right? Then those first 3 months are critical to establish rapport and build trust. Then it's when the whole process is really beginning. And we give them the opportunity to extend the process for another period of time with the specific targets. And it's amazing the amount of kids that they are the ones that are asking for the extension. And it's also rewarding, I guess, for the coaches and for us as a program, when we know that the clients are still in touch with the coaches after they finish the program and everything. Then going back to your question of how we measure success, that is one of the ways to measure success. Because what is success, right? That is a very individual and subject thing. For some, it's not reoffending. For others, it's also going to the school, getting a job, having better relations with their families, establishing different ways to communicate, recognizing their values. Then all those elements, when I'm doing the assessment, we try to match and pair with the coaches to see which will be the better match. And the other thing, and I guess is one of the reasons why we are so successful in the coaching program, is because for youth and teenagers, it's a lack of having someone that is paying attention to them, that really is listening to them, right? And here you have a bunch of professionals that are good professionals that are having the time just for them, that are asking the precise questions. What matters to you? What is important to you? What do you want? And that is important. Then that is one of the things why when if somebody is asking why you don't pick just youth, young coaches or coaches that can relate because they had the same previous experiences or whatever, not necessarily they need that. They need a role model. They need somebody that can let them know that they can be success in life. They can succeed. They can achieve their goals. That they trust and give confidence and security and all those kind of things.
Oh, thank you.
And I commend CATA for the great work that they do in the campus. These coaches are the real heroes. They're the ones that are in there day in, week out. And it's not just showing up once a week. It's the text messages and the phone calls and all the stuff that you get in between that, really makes the difference. And so the great work. And my happiest days of the year are when I get the graduation certificates, right, Kat?
It's unbelievable. And I always, when I introduce the coach, because the process after the assessment is having all the parties together and introducing the coach and having the ground rules. And from that moment, they are in their own, they as a couple, the coach and the client. And I always said the coaches are 24/7, and it's true. I mean, they walk the extra mile for whatever. If they are struggling with something, they can text, they can call, they can be there. And one of the other values is that the clients, we go where they are. We don't want them to make the excuse that they didn't attend the program because they didn't have transportation or they were far or whatever. The coach, when we have the first meeting, the coach and the client decide where they are going to meet, where the youth feel safe to meet with the coach. They can walk on a ravine, they can go to a museum, they can go to a McDonald's. McDonald's is a really good thing for some of them. Library. I mean, we have different kind of traits and options, and we are really creative giving that the space. Sometimes, for example, for them is we have a specific coach that he always had a good cars, and for the clients it's a big deal to have a nice ride to the school and arrive in a cool car, right? It's part of how they don't necessarily say who the person is, but those kind of tricks. And if you allow me, I have an anecdote with one of the clients that finished the program. He was in the system, and in the system, not just the legal, also under child aid since he was 7. He didn't have anyone, no parents, no cousins, no uncles, no one. Then could you imagine the trust part on that kind of kids? And when we finished, and this was a particular client that didn't like the word goals. And we switched for different things. We found different words. We are really flexible. We dance in the moment with the client. And at the end, when we were doing the evaluation, I said, what is different now? And he said, now I know that I can be happy. We are not able to put that in the statistics. We are not able to have that in the matrix, how you measure happiness. But for me, I still have tears in my eyes with that story, because that is what we do, having different human beings for the society.
Wow. Powerful.
Yeah.
Okay, any last question? In particular, Thomas B. Doesn't have his video on, so I can't see if he wants to ask a question. I guess not. If there's no other questions, I'll call on the president of the Rotary Club of York, Mandy, to thank our guest speaker.
Yeah. Thank you, David, for presenting the material tonight. It's my first time knowing the detail inside and out, and I'm really impressed with the kind of work that PACT had done in the past, almost 2 decades. And 2 things that stands out that I do appreciate what David and PACT organization did. This is the sense of social responsibility that we all, each one should share and should contribute back. In many cases, as Rotarians, we have a social conscious, we have a responsibility, and PACT shares the same mission that, you know, we all wanted to make the society a better place to live in. And we wanted to help. How can we help? PACT offer us a solution to help out the young offenders, in a sense. So the second point that I got from tonight's meeting is we can do the power of community. We could get clubs and local communities and groups together to make it happen, to share the kind of social responsibility and to help those who are in need, the young offenders. And for that, I do thank David tonight for really bringing out all different kinds of situations and how the youth, the model group could be developed and carry on further and scale it out to other cities. And for that, we do appreciate your effort in the past. And the road has been laid down for us. And for now, what we would like to is to get to know when we can start, how we can get started, how we can get involved. Thank you, Dave.